Well, kids, this is where you would normally play Suikoden, except Konami doesn't make Suikoden anymore. So, here's Kickstarter's new crowdfunded replacement, Eiyuden Chronicle!
That leaves only the monster blocking the gate.
What the hell is that?
I'm going to spoil this video a bit by telling you that I did not care for this game, but I'd hoped that what we'd received would be the end of it. Then I saw this.
Oh my god!
It seems that there is more necessity to this video, or the sentiments it expresses, than I'd first believed. Eiyuden Chronicle, 100 Heroes. I'm not sure when and where I first heard about this game, but it was probably through the Suikoden Revival Movement Facebook group. This would make sense, as the game was billed as being a spiritual successor to that franchise, specifically to Suikoden 1 and 2. The promotional materials even depicted it sharing an aesthetic with those particular games, albeit with a 2.5D facelift as was given to the Live Alive remake and the, at the time of writing, upcoming Dragon Quest Erdrick Saga remakes. Full disclosure, as a gamer, with JRPGs being my genre of choice, Suikoden 1 and 2, as a single collective experience, is my favorite RPG maybe of all time. Sure, Final Fantasy VI, Dragon Quest IV, Phantasy Star 4, Shining Force 2, Live Alive, Mother 3, all of these, among others, have a special place of prominence in my heart. However, Suikoden 1 and 2, with all their gravitas, their twists and turns, their memorable characters, their smooth combat system, the collection aspect of seeking out and acquiring new recruits, the music, the art style, really, I can't say enough good things about it. You'll find a great many people out there who will sing the praises of the 3rd, 4th, and 5th titles in the franchise as well, and although none of them were without their charm, they failed to truly capture the essence of what I personally enjoyed about those first two. Maybe I just don't like the transition to 3D. Maybe I don't like that they made Stolteheim Reinbach an actual character instead of a running joke. Maybe I didn't like the weird underage pregnancy angle they threw at my favorite female character. And no, I won't claim games 1 and 2 were perfect. There were glitches, poor translations, some lacking quality of life improvements, but none of these things were enough to turn me off as other titles would, with oversaturation, or base-breaking sequels, or overhyped, overblown promises that the developers lacked the manpower, money, or maybe just talent to follow through on. I couldn't tell ya. I wasn't in the room, I just played the game. But I'm getting ahead of myself.
I need about 350.
350.
I was one among many who kickstarted Eiyuden Chronicle 100 Heroes back when it was announced. Years passed after that, and although I would get plenty of Kickstarter updates telling me about characters who would be a part of the game, I paid little attention. After all, what would be the point, as I would be meeting and hopefully recruiting these characters myself before too long? Why would I want to spoil the details about Crocodile Dundalk, or Johnny Steps, or whatever that is? They even talked about a prequel game called Eiyuden Chronicle Rising, a 2D platformer of some kind that would be released before 100 Heroes. I didn't bother playing it, and from what I understand, it wasn't that great. Fine at best. Plus, it didn't do much to further the story of the main game. It just featured some of its side characters and offered minor Easter egg rewards that carried over. Anyway, so much time had passed from when I initially kickstarted the game to when it was released that I'd completely forgotten I'd plopped down any money for it to begin with. I actually had access to the beta and could have been playing it long before its release. Just as well that I didn't. I doubt that if I'd said then what I will be saying in a few minutes, anything would have changed. I saw on the Suikoden Revival Movement's feed that Eiyuden was going to be launching later in the week, which reminded me that I had at least visited its Kickstarter page. I swung back over to see if I'd actually donated or if I'd only dreamed it. Sure enough, my digital copy was right there, waiting for me to crack that bitch open on my very next day of streaming. I was so young and foolish back then.
I promise as soon as I...
If promises were crackers, my daughter would be fat.
First things first. Is Eiyuden Chronicle 100 Heroes a JRPG in which you collect characters to upgrade your home base and fight against a tyrannical army threatening the continued well-being of the country you call home?
Yes.
Well, good. You succeeded in supplying the bare minimum criteria of being a Suikoden-style game. But if you're going to tout yourself as an honest-to-God spiritual successor to the franchise, the bare minimum isn't going to be enough. You need to match or improve on the quality in most of, if not every, respect, just as Suikoden 2 did for 1. Did it accomplish this?
You know, one thing I should... Excuse me for 1 second.
Of course.
Judging by the critics' scores and the general consensus, yes. People seem to like this game for all the reasons the advertising says one ought to like it.
It's the most fun in the park!
All the member berries, big noises, and shiny things were enough to get the big numbers from the important internet people. Even before starting the game, I'd checked out one popular YouTuber's first impressions of Eiyuden, one who had in the past cited Suikoden 2 as one of the best, if not the best, JRPG he's ever played. He had nothing but praise for the new game. It was very shilly praise though, and since I'd seen that he'd praised Raid Shadow Legends in the past, I couldn't shake a certain sense of foreboding. Then again, I like to think we've all done things we're not proud of. I would give this game the benefit of the doubt. So now, having completed the game myself and invested time to the tune of more than 150 hours, let's look into this with some beige-tinted, no-shilling, brutal honesty.
Give me the meat, and give it to me raw.
Disclaimer, I'm just a casual gamer, not a programmer, not a professional critic. I'm just here to offer some perspective.
Silver and gold.
Before I get into my longer rants, I'll give you the stuff I actually liked about the game. Don't get up, it won't take long. The game's character art style was great, and even better, consistent. None of the characters looked out of place as they could with Suikoden 1. The character sprites and animations in and out of battle were gorgeous. The music was scored beautifully, and although I can't think of any single track that stood out to me as a favorite, it was a major step up from Suikoden 1 and 2. 9 out of 10. My only bit of criticism there is that they could go a little hard on the choir during certain moments, making them sound over the top rather than the epic feel they were probably going for.
Let the sun ride about you all across the universe.
Largely, though, these aspects of the game understood the assignment. Eiyuden also featured a little dot on the minimap which would guide you in the direction of the plot, a handy tool for those of us who tend to forget where they're going. It has a habit of getting a bit confused sometimes, though, so you end up running in circles, but largely, it's a good addition. In the hero's headquarters, it follows the Suikoden format of allowing shops and services access to all characters, not just those in your immediate party. If you want to outfit your new characters, you don't need to shuffle your party members around. Just buy stuff and pick the character you want to put it on. Of course, the UI can get a bit wonky, and you might end up buying way more than you need to by accident. It's not a perfect process, not as seamless as in Suikoden 2 and onward anyway, but I appreciate the effort. The game also allows you to get far more out of your recruits than Suikoden ever did. Apart from the 6 characters you use in battle, you also have a 7th slot for a support character who can speed up your movement, power up your party randomly at the start of battle, increase the likelihood of drop loot, and other effects. Some more useful than others, but we'll get to that. In addition, you have a convoy of 3 additional slots. If random people are forced into your party by the plot, you can shuffle either them or members of your current party into these spaces to make room. They don't get experience, but you can always shuffle them to and from the convoy if you want. Suikoden 5 did something like this, but I think Eiyuden might have done it a little better. On top of that, it feels like every party member has something to say whenever you enter a specific town or at certain points in the story, depending on if they're in your party. In fact, these little conversations pop up constantly, On the world map, in towns and dungeons, everywhere. Even at the end, you get a little one-on-one scene with the recruit the protagonist has spoken to the most. It must have taken a lot of work, and I'll give credit where it's due. Okay, there's your wheat. More of it than I thought there'd be when I first conceived of this video. But there's still a lot of video left. Get ready for the chaff.
So I'm gonna need you to get all the way off my back about manufactured, meaningless conflict.
Shut up, I'm talking!
A perennial issue I've had with modern RPGs is the voice acting. All too often, games will half-ass the voice acting, only performing some lines or truncating them to a point where 1 or 2 syllables represent an entire paragraph.
No. I challenge my fate!
Having a character say something different from what I'm reading is very distracting. It's gotta be all or none, fellas. Or if you're working on a budget, only have voice acting in cutscenes. Just be consistent whatever you do. That's why I was pleasantly surprised to see that Eiyuden had recorded lines of almost all the important dialogue in the game, and then some. Like I said before, numerous cutscenes had different possible recorded lines depending on who was in the party or other factors, and that was pretty admirable. Recording, programming, and cost must have made for a monstrous undertaking. But there was a drawback that I did not foresee. These guys will not shut up.
Who among you seeks to
Your
become
weapons
my
are well cared for.
Let's do this!
This is the right place. Yes.
And evolve!
Zippity lips, so patamine shablooey!
Comes around! I can't believe you don't shut up!
I first noticed the problem during the battle against Nerthus. Nerthus is an obnoxiously programmed shell game boss with no pattern or way to predict it, who will completely annihilate you if you're not at a suitable level with a less than complete party. Now, rest whatever blame you will on me for going in unprepared, that's a fair cop. But I think the punishment here did not fit the crime.
Strike this up for size!
That's the lovely Justice Hammer!
For God's sake.
Justice!
What does that even mean?
Go get him! That's the lovely Justice Hammer! Listen to the whispers of justice!
What does that even mean?
You can turn off the voice acting, sure, that's a choice, but then you miss the voice acting in the post-battle cutscene all the way until you have a chance to turn it back on. But the problem doesn't end there. In the world of Suikoden, there's a character named Vicky who acts as the method of fast travel in every installment of the franchise. She's a teleportation prodigy, total sweetheart, but a bit of an airhead and prone to misfires, especially when it's allergy season. In Eiyuden, the role of Vicky is played by insufferable, self-aggrandizing blowhard, one of many, name of Carrie. Carrie is the best at teleporting, and she will remind you of it every time you use her powers to go anywhere.
I'm a teleportation professional. One perfect teleportation coming up. I have literally never failed at this. Not once. Perfect. As usual.
This should have been caught in quality assurance. They actually address her abilities and flaws several times throughout the story, so we don't need to hear about it every time we use what should be a convenient utility. It just makes it unpleasant. You can turn off the voice acting if it bothers you that much. Yeah, I know, we covered that before, and I'm not going to turn it off and on again every time I teleport. It would probably tack on another 3 hours to my total playtime. Incidentally, Carrie, stop asking me if this is the right place! It's our base! You're fucking standing in it!
You're reading the wine list, sir.
Very good.
Even after having played the game for many hours, I never got a handle on how to navigate the menu screen. In Suikoden, you just hit the menu button and navigate its windows with the directional pad, confirm, and cancel buttons. Meanwhile, in Eiyuden, you hit the menu button, you use the shoulder triggers to very slowly work your way through a just long enough to be annoying list of sections of the menu, then use the right and left shoulder buttons to navigate subsections of the menu, then the directional pad and confirm cancel buttons until you find the thing you want. What could be simpler? And this is the menu screen, something you use all the time. It shouldn't be a long, drawn-out, clunky process. It seems like it'd be hard to screw that up, but they found a way. The menu does feature a section dedicated to tutorials which explain how various aspects of the game work, battles, minigames, menus, etc. I complain a lot in this video about Eiyuden's more complex or confusing elements, but considering I was able to bumble through to the end anyway, that tells me that the tutorials, or more specifically, all the complicated bells and whistles the tutorials explain, were never necessary to begin with, and could have been streamlined or omitted entirely. Suikoden games, even as late as 5, were pretty intuitive, and you didn't need to do a bunch of extra reading in order to maximize your gameplay experience.
Funding for this program was made possible by annual financial support from viewers like you.
You cannot name your own castle. In any other Suikoden game, you are always able to name your base of operations. It's a fun little treat in what can be a story with some very heavy content. In Eiyuden Chronicle, you are instead presented with a long list of pre-generated castle names. Now, I'm just a simple happy chicken from a backwood asteroid, so I don't know exactly how long it takes to program the means to name a castle yourself instead of choosing from a list. It's not like the cast ever mentions the castle by name in recorded dialogue, so they can't cite that as a limitation. But what I do know is that there were a lot of Kickstarter backers for the project. How do I know this? Because you see a bunch of crazy names and faces everywhere. Random faceless NPCs, flooding the corner of the screen in the middle of war battles, statues, paintings, headstones, it's a mess. I could be wrong, but I'm willing to bet each one of those many castle name choices was a backer suggestion. Otherwise, I can't fathom why you couldn't just name the damn thing yourself. And while I'm on the subject, those weird names were distracting seeing them all over. God knows you'd never see a message pop up in Suikoden 2 that Buckfutter69 died heroically in battle. Because Suikoden 2 had some fucking integrity. Even after having donated money, I'd rather see a well-made game than see my name attached to a statue in some guy's house.
Today on This Old House, we start an entirely new project.
Speaking of the castle, in Suikoden games, the way the headquarters worked was simple. You recruit a person by whatever means. They join you in your castle, and if they had some kind of special function, innkeeper, blacksmith, armorer, whatever, they would automatically open their service in their little corner of your base. In Eiyuden, however, we run into not one, but two little twists. First, most times, as you finish a character's side quest or task, you have a choice of whether or not you want to recruit them. If you choose to recruit them, congrats, you're playing the game as intended. If you chose not to, congrats, thou hast wasted thy fucking time. Why would you ever go through the trouble of hacking through the jungle to get a specific item and bring it all the way back to the person, only to say, nah, I don't want all the benefits of recruiting you, enjoy your thingy. What's the point? They actually used code to put that useless choice in the game, for almost every character. They don't let you name your own castle, but they programmed in the means to willfully inconvenience yourself.
Why? Come on.
Didn't we already exert our agency as a player enough by choosing to do their quest in the first place? What's the point of this? The second twist comes after you have recruited the party member and returned to your castle. There, you'll find Iris. Side note, I find the term waifu cringy and dumb, but I have to admit, if there's one character I'd guiltlessly grant that title, it would be this nameless NPC guard my friend christened Bailey. Where was I? Iris is an architect who is in charge of building out your castle. Now, the way it normally works in Suikoden games is you recruit a guy, the addition gets made, bada bing bada boom, you have a new feature in your base. There wasn't a process beyond that. It wouldn't have been necessary. But not in this game. Eiyuden features an entire skill tree style interface that you need to navigate in order to build a character's little shop once they're recruited. That's right, that item seller you met who sold you items right out of his pockets in that dungeon won't sell you anything once recruited until you actively build his shop. More than that, you need to make sure you have the resources to build it. You feel like wasting a few hours of game time running back and forth through the forest to collect lumber? Or the mines for iron and stone? How about hunting down pelts and orichalcum and legendary beast fangs and chips of the fucking world tree?
Hi, Editor Sam here, breaking the fourth wall to give my 2 cents on something that I noticed. So in Eiyuden Chronicle, whenever you update your base, a little jingle plays. which, apart from the fact that it plays over top of the already playing ambient music instead of muting it, it also sounded very familiar to me for some reason. And then I realized, this is just a Metroid Victory theme. I'll never unhear that, and neither will you. Anyway, back to the video.
Oh, what's that? If you recruit certain characters, they'll automatically farm resources to make it more convenient? Or you can put them in your party to increase your gains from resource nodes? Interesting, interesting. Hey, real quick, you know what would make it even more convenient than that? Not having the fucking building tree!
These kinds of things were meant to elongate a game. They're made to manipulate you into thinking you're achieving something more than you're actually achieving.
You said it, Aaron. You said it 13 years ago, and apparently some people haven't learned a damn thing. Minigames in Suikoden titles are an inevitability. Suikoden 1 had Marco's shell game, Gasper's match game, that dumb Wheel of Fortune thing we all hated. Suikoden 2 had the dancing minigame, the cooking minigame, the climbing minigame, and both have that infamous dice game, Chimney Chip. You know the one I'm talking about. Eiyuden Chronicle has its own set of minigames, and each one has its own set of problems to match. First we have the card game, Wannabe Marvel Snap, which is required to recruit Glenn and Shixine. The game is basically governed by RNG. If you want conclusive evidence of that, Shixine is supposedly a rank S opponent and I beat her on my first try, my 4th or 5th time playing the game in general. Maybe it was through blind luck, maybe I'm magic, I don't know. You can play cards with anyone and everyone, but I couldn't be bothered to play it more than the amount of times the game forces you to, let alone for fun. Maybe it's your thing, sure wasn't mine. Next is the racing game you need to do to recruit Scarlet. The time you have to beat it in is unreasonable, considering the boat handles like it was programmed by Bennett Foddy. There's barely any direction, and if you go the wrong way, you're immediately disqualified. Granted, this means you don't have to waste time on a run that was doomed anyway, but it gets incredibly frustrating. The cooking minigame is taken one for one from Suikoden 2. Some additional animations, special effects, and a lot of new menu items were added, but fundamentally, they're the same game. An enemy chef arrives at your base and challenges your chef to a cook-off. 4 of your recruits are randomly selected as judges, and you have to rapidly press a button to complete your menu on time. The judge's score depends on if you tap the button well enough, and ideally, depends on what you fed them.
Lots of spaghetti.
Apparently, like in Suikoden 2, each recruit has a specific taste in food, and if you give them that, they'll give you a high score. There are 4 judges though, so if only one judge likes a specific type of food, you might need to cut off a finger to save the hand, so to speak, and pander to the majority. At least, that's how it's supposed to work in Eiyuden. I tried serving people stuff a guy told me they like, but they gave me crap scores anyway. Maybe the guy was wrong, but it was all I had when the game was not forthcoming on who likes what, and I didn't have the patience to guess and check. Finally, recruiting Reed and Dr. Cork requires you to let her rip with their ersatz Beyblade called Begama. The protagonist treats this minigame with a bizarre level of gravitas, as though he's forgotten there's an actual war happening, and lives are at stake while he's busy defeating the 4 Spin Masters or whatever. The subplot goes on way too long, not to mention it requires you to grind enemies to find rare tops in order to even compete beyond the basic level, because more grinding is fun, isn't it?
Oh, my favorite!
The Begama subplot culminates in an event near the end of the game. Now, picture this. You're in the final dungeon about to decide the fate of the country, if not the world, in a last series of epic battles. Everything hangs in the balance. Then, while exploring for some last-minute treasures or keys, you enter a random side room and Dr. Cork is in there? In what he calls his secret chamber to challenge you to one more game of Begama.
Okay.
Now, you might be wondering what's wrong with that. It's a cute little send-off to the subplot of that fun little minigame. If this had happened in a secret dungeon elsewhere, or in the post-game, I would agree with you. But they made the specific choice to put him here. I have to think it only triggers if you'd finish the rest of the Begama subplot as some kind of secret reward, but the timing of this sequence is awful. Whatever drama they were trying to build in navigating this immense castle in this final stretch of the story is interrupted by this random appearance from a joke character that is grossly out of place and goes on for far too long. By all means, I have no problem with bathos. A good laugh is needed to balance out the more serious moments of a story. But this game was goofy enough, with few, if any, truly serious moments to balance out in the first place. All this does is ruin their last chance to set up a truly epic moment. Not to mention the mind-boggling tactical implications of one of our recruits having a secret lair in the middle of the final enemy stronghold. Does the Galdian Empire know about it? Did they see strategic value in his Begema research? Has he actually been a Galdian spy or a double agent this entire time, and it just never came up? Nobody sees fit to ask any questions here? Or did I just forget to bring any smart characters? Plus, I thought we were on something of a time frame? What with the crazy, powerful, magical nuke still live and ready to blow at any minute? How did that suddenly become less of a priority? The final boss is only rooms away, and the apocalypse is nigh. But sure, be my guest. Let her rip, motherfuckers! You did not see Karen challenging you to a dance-off in La Renoir. Dr. Cork should not be here! Okay, so safe to say I did not like the minigames themselves or the clumsiness with which they were inserted into the actual game. But I'll make another quick comparison to clarify why I am offended rather than just apathetic. The aforementioned minigames from the Suikoden franchise were simply the function of a given character. You play it to recruit them, then you can play it again back at the base if you really wanted to for fun, money, or trophies. Those that showed up in the actual plot made sense.
Example. Okay.
In both Suikoden 1 and 2, you had to play Chinchira-rin against Taiho in order to get his help and his boat. A free-spirited vagabond by nature, Taiho, much to the chagrin of his brother-in-law Yamku, agrees to take you wherever you want to go, if you can beat him in a game of chance. He's a smuggler, a gambler, an all-around risk-taker, so it makes sense he'd gravitate toward those favored by old Lady Luck. Meanwhile, in Eiyuden, the Shiarks are a race of shark people who live in the desert because they're afraid of water.
I suppose you think that was terribly clever.
You approach them about an alliance because they're among the territories threatened by an evil empire who do not like beastmen specifically. Members of said empire mention it whenever a beastman is in the area, or even brought up in conversation. It makes no sense for them to not join the rebellion. It would leave them isolated and open to invasion by the Imperial forces. It would make sense if the Shiarks challenged you to battle them personally, or sent you off to fight a monster in a nearby cave to test your skill, just to make sure you're the guy they should be following. They do not do this. What do instead? They challenge you to drive a boat.
Now this is pod racing.
If you can prove you can captain one of their dumb little sailboats on a race course, their entire species will commit themselves to your cause. I should not have to spell out how psychotic this is. Hell, even the Kong Mafia required a trial by combat before they got around to the pointless driving sequence. Side by side, one feels like a logical sequence of events, while the other feels like an excuse for some guy to cram in more of the boat minigame he was super proud of.
A brawl is surely brewing. And begin!
Battle is a very large part of Suikoden-style games, to a point where there are 3 different kinds of battles. First, we have your run-of-the-mill random battles. Up to 6 of your party members take on up to 6 enemies. Repeat ad nauseum until you make it through the dungeon or across the map to your next destination. Second, we have war battles. This system changed the most from one Suikoden to the next, and because of that, I'm going to go off on a quick sidebar to give you a brief history of war in the world of Suikoden! Suikoden 1's war system was a rock-paper-scissors affair, where some cheating was available if you had recruited certain characters. Suikoden 2 looked a little more Fire Emblem-y in its design, if not in its execution. I'm not sure if it had the same rock-paper-scissors mechanic as Suikoden 1, or Fire Emblem itself for that matter, but it allowed you to customize your units with whatever abilities you chose. Although, clashes between units always seem governed by RNG anyhow. Suikoden 3 was not my favorite, but it was probably the best system as far as player agency goes. War battles were just a series of random battle-style skirmishes between units you would move around on a board. On one hand, it felt like more of the same, but on the other hand, you had a direct hand in the battle. Suikoden 4 was pretty much exclusively naval battles, floating around and exchanging cannon fire, about as tedious as the rest of that game was. Suikoden 5 was a real-time strategy system which was hard to keep track of, and it always felt like you were behind no matter how many recruits you'd acquired or how weak the enemy should logically be at a given point in the story. This has been a brief history of war in the world of Suikoden! Lastly, the third combat type is one-on-one duels. Tests of strength, of pride, of courage, or simply a desperate last stand when armies fail and allies falter. It all comes down to one more game of rock, paper, scissors. Suikoden generally did not stray from this format. Attack, defend, and wild/special attack, trying to judge from the opponent's banter what their next maneuver would be, and picking the move to counter it. In Suikoden 5, they added a timer, but that's pretty much the only variation. Your effectiveness is also governed by your equipment and level, so God help you if you're not prepared. Of course, in Suikoden, it's unlikely your hero was ever going to be undergeared or underleveled, but he isn't always going to be the one fighting. If one of your warriors is caught slipping, you might be in for a tragic surprise. Sidebar, these duels always took place between martial characters. I would have been interested to see a duel between magical characters. God knows Suikoden had plenty. But anyway, back to the matter at hand. So, respectively, here's Eiuden's take on the battle types. The random battle system looks like a one-for-one reproduction. There can be differences in the battlefield terrain, so you'll see characters and party members positioned on various elevations. If this has any impact on combat performance, it never manifested for me in any meaningful way. Like in Suikoden, there are short, medium, and long-range characters, fighters, magic users, archers, and others. Quick warning though, don't assume that putting your more fragile characters in the back row will protect them. Enemies can just jump over your tanks and hit them whenever they like, and use special AoE attacks to hit them anyway.
That's against the rules, isn't it?
Screw the rules, I have green hair.
Eiyuden also introduces the gimmick mechanic. I had a knee-jerk reaction to the notion, as my history with the word gimmick in games has always had a negative connotation. In this game, though...
How many L's in ambivalent?
In theory, it's interesting. It adds another dimension to combat, interacting with the environment. In practice, it might as well not even be there. In standard battles, it only allows you to open a treasure chest you might see on the field. In early boss fights, you'll hide behind a piece of terrain, operate a crane to drop debris on enemies, or fire a cannon. Eventually... Remember that Nerthus fight I mentioned before? Well, this is the shell game thing I was talking about. You have to choose between one of two books to activate the gimmick. If you guess right, you deal heavy damage to the enemy and might stun him for a round. Guess wrong and...
Go get him, magical lovely...
No! Please, not anymore! I'll tell you what the secret plans are! Just stop!
This was the moment I started to think I might hate this game. If it was going to be more of this, I wanted no part of it. But I paid $43, so I was committed. In Suikoden, characters could equip runes. Runes granted the ability to use magical or special attacks, generally allowing you to deal more damage, AoE damage, status effects, and more. Also, there was another neat mechanic called Unite attacks. If certain party members were on a team together, they could use a combination attack, which had a similar assortment of effects to runes. It was kind of fun seeing what party members synergized with others. Eiyuden had both of these things, but much like building your headquarters, they added resources. SP for rune and unite attacks, and MP for magical attacks. In Suikoden, physical attacks using runes, such as the boar or unicorn runes, as well as unite attacks, were pretty much free as long as you had the relevant rune equipped or party members on your team. At most, someone might get stunned for a round after using it, take some damage, or it might have a once per battle limit. In Eiyuden, SP gradually charges up over rounds, limiting the attacks you can use until you have enough. This means that you have to wait several turns to use your special and unite attacks while the enemy rains down their own AoE strikes, which seems to cost them nothing and requires no time to recharge. Suikoden's magic system was pretty simple. Each character had a certain amount of spells per level, and what spells they could use depended on what rune they had equipped. There was no way to recover spells outside of inns, so you just needed to be careful. MP is a pool of energy that you would spend to cast whatever spells you have at your disposal. Unlike Suikoden, you're not guaranteed a number of spells per level. While the enemy peppers you with powerful spells ad nauseum, you have to choose between using your very limited magic pool to heal or deal damage, because you generally don't have enough to do both. Items that restore a reasonable amount of MP are not easy to come by, so you're better off just using herbs to heal and relying on martial fighters since magicians are less viable because of this. Sure, you can equip rune lenses to give characters a higher MP score, but having to use special equipment to make your characters function how they're supposed to seems less like potential for customization and more like a design flaw.
And now for something completely different.
Phantasy Star 4 is an RPG for the Sega Genesis released in 1995. It was the culmination of the events of, and far and away, the best game in the series. This game introduced me to the macro system. The macro system allowed you to program in a set of actions for your characters and the order in which they were performed. You could have several macros available at once. Starting a boss battle? You could pick your designated buffing macro to cast a bunch of support spells and abilities, then pick a macro with all your best attacks for a full beatdown. Dealing with trash mobs? Pick your basic attack macro and clear them out no problem. Pick a healing macro if you're on the ropes. If you're dealing with something more complicated, you can always go back to inputting commands normally. The macros were just an incredibly handy tool to have. Suikoden had the free will auto battle function. It didn't let you program in moves, but it still helped clear out trash mobs. Eiyuden has good intentions? The game conjured up this whole system of ostensibly allowing you to micromanage its own auto battle function. Like unto Final Fantasy XII, you can relinquish your engagement completely, programming your party to prioritize specific actions at specific times. You know, in case actually playing a video game is beneath you. I toyed with it for a bit, but after seeing either no change in my party's battle habits, or having the system misinterpret my intent like a lethargic genie, I gave up on it altogether and played the game normally. It's just as well. When I'm not gaming, I fancy myself as a writer. I've already had enough of AI trying to replace my livelihood, damned if I'll hand over my leisure activities too. As for the rest of you, if you prefer having as little interaction with your games as possible, I think certain internet personalities can recommend just the game for you. Okay, another quick sidebar before we continue on to war battles: enemy design. Earlier, I praised Eiyuden for its masterful pixel work with its character sprites. Its monsters, however? I can't know the specifics of what went on behind the scenes and who made what decisions, but I've categorized all the enemies in Eiyuden into 3 groups. Group 1 is the app game monsters. They remind me of something out of a cheaply produced pay-to-win app game like Mutants Genetic Gladiators or something. Group 2 is the 3D rendered monsters. Some budget went into these things, but they do not fit in with the other enemies that inhabit the dungeons you traverse to reach them. Group 3 is what I refer to as the refrigerator gallery monsters. I can only assume one of the developer's 4-year-old children was consulted to design these guys. Seriously, what are these? Explain to me what these are and how they fit into the world. The wizard bunnies I get, but
what are those?
Regardless of what any of the enemies in Suikoden looked like, they were consistent. Eiyuden needed to commit to one art style for its bestiary. The shifts to 3D or to abstract doodles only served to remind me I was playing a crowd-funded game. Okay, sidebar over. On to war battles. Eiyuden's take on war battles is similar to Suikoden 2, in which you can put together units, if you can figure out how, I never bothered, and move them across the battlefield, using your character's special abilities to power up stats, move additional spaces, inflict damage to enemy units, etc. Further, there are rage and morale bonuses which, when triggered, can grant additional bonuses. But none of it matters because the war battles consist almost entirely of scripted events, And what isn't scripted doesn't seem like it matters at all. Use whatever abilities you want, move your units however you like. I'm not convinced that you can actually lose, and I don't have the patience to go back and find out. You may test that assumption at your convenience. But even a cursory internet search supported the notion that the war battles are nothing but glorified cutscenes. On one hand, that's a relief because it means less resetting and your recruits won't die like they can in Suikoden if things go awry. But on the other hand, it means the war battles are pointless. Plenty of dramatic dialogue, but no agency and no sense of accomplishment when you win. And they are slow. Suikoden war battles could be pretty lengthy and tedious in some installments, but by God, Eiyuden does nothing to fix that. They take one of the formats that was bugged but okay and made it objectively worse. And now?
It's time to duel!
The rock, paper, scissors system of Suikoden has been tweaked in favor of picking either attack or counter. The opponent still delivers banter, but the banter rarely hints at what might be the right strategy. I swear, I tried both choices against the same quote and failed both times. There's a threshold on the enemy's life bar which, when reached, allows you to use your third option, break. This triggers a lengthy cutscene in which more dialogue occurs while the animators have their pixelated action figures jump and flip and flail around with their weapons.
The game just by itself, John! The game just...
Yes, they could have just had this happen automatically when the enemy's health reached that threshold, but I guess they needed to have 3 options to make it more like Suikoden. Maybe they consider these breakpoints as being some kind of reward for making it that far in the duel. A big animated set piece. But all I could think was, gee, this looks fun. I wish I could participate.
I love duels. Love to be a part of one someday.
I'm not a huge fan of QuickTime events, but at least if they used some of those, it would have added a level of engagement instead of this.
I have lost my sense of direction. Have you tried Hare Krishna?
The maps are an issue. The dungeons were very, very long and tended to require a lot of backtracking to grab characters and keys or activate switches, which made them take even longer to navigate. More than once I found myself trekking all the way to one end of a dungeon just to grab a key so that I could run all the way back to the other end to open that key's door just to get another key and repeat the process. Fun story, this process got so boring and repetitive that I fell asleep live on stream during Sane's side quest. Not my proudest moment, but consider that games like Old Market Simulator haven't garnered so much as a yawn. And this was during Eiuden's Metroid Fusion moment, where their big scary end monster was in the background, supposedly a frightening portent for things to come. And another little annoyance regarding maps. As you navigate the game from screen to screen, the directions have a tendency to flip. You'll be running upward, but on the next screen the perspective will flip so you're actually moving downward. So if you hold the joystick or directional pad in the direction you were heading in, you'll end up running back to the previous screen. This happened very often, and I wish the maps had been designed differently, or at the very least, the overworld map would stop rotating on its own whenever I enter or leave a location. Hey, have you noticed the complete lack of any consistency whatsoever in the visual aspects of Eiuden's design? Think about it.
I will.
No, you won't. Alright, I think that covers the general issues I had with the gameplay. Now it's time I address the characters and the plot. At this point, I feel it's important to address the elephant in the room.
Hey, he looks wrong. In fact, he's horrible. He's so ugly.
There were a lot of big names who worked on Eiyuden Chronicle 100 Heroes. Some of them worked on some pretty popular RPGs in the past, and even games from the Suikoden franchise itself. This does not mean that Eiyuden should be defended from criticism just because certain names were attached to the project. There are games made by unknown development teams minuscule in comparison on a shoestring budget who nevertheless manage to produce games that are far more fun, playable, and memorable than whatever they're attempting here. Regardless of who was involved, someone dropped the ball, and if they're going to tout themselves as the next coming of Suikoden Jesus, I need that final product to shine. At best, I would categorize Eiyuden as a well-meaning but flawed product, lacking in originality or substance. You may consider this an insensitive take, but I'm not going to hold back on my critiques just because some veteran developers had a hand in it. If anything, that's all the more reason to have high expectations and to be critical when they aren't surpassed or even met.
Yeah, that's one fine-looking barbecue pit. Why doesn't mine look like that? Disappointed!
Since Eiyuden Chronicle has taken inspiration from Suikoden's plot points, characters, minigames, infrastructure, and more, eventually you're going to start comparing the new game to the old. And that's what the game wants you to do. The problem this evokes is that, unless you are extremely charitable, a discerning eye will start noticing where the game fails far more than where it succeeds. The plot is shallow and relies a lot on spectacle and drama that it didn't earn. The characters are mostly cookie-cutter copies of Suikoden characters or simply one-note tropes. Now, normally I don't care about spoiling games that I don't respect. But the problem here is that in order to explain Eiuden's failings in full, I will need to spoil parts of Suikoden 1 and 2. Okay, maybe just the Suikoden series in general. Now, I'm going to reconcile this by assuming, since you played Eiyuden, you've already played Suikoden 1 and 2, and were just looking for that fix. If you haven't, maybe turn this off until you've played that Suikoden 1 and 2 remaster that's supposed to be coming down the pike, or the original if you have it, or failing that, skip to the timestamp in the description. At the beginning of Suikoden 2, we join our hero Ryu and his childhood friend Joey Atreides.
Atreides nuts, son!
Two members of the Highland Army Youth Corps known as the Unicorn Brigade. The brigade was a bunch of kids who weren't even real soldiers yet. Ryu and Joey were capable fighters, what with one being trained by a legendary martial artist and the other by the Royal Military, but they weren't old enough to be frontliners. The Kingdom of Highland had been at war with the neighboring city-states of Joustin, but the fighting had more or less ended. It was just a matter of waiting for the peace treaty to be signed. But one night, as the Unicorn Brigade was minding its own business, they were ambushed and slaughtered almost to a man by an attack squad from Joustin, obliterating any hope for peace. However, as Joey and Ryu make their escape from the massacre, they discover that the culprits behind this heinous act was not the Joustin army, but the Prince of Highland himself, Luca Blight, and his White Wolf Company. Luca Blight, a monster of a man and the most powerful single human warrior in the Suikoden franchise, had no intention of letting the war end. He staged a false flag operation by butchering the Unicorn Brigade in order to prolong the war, just so he could lay waste to the entirety of the city-states. Why? I could tell you. They tell you in the game. But YouTube doesn't like us talking about what city-state mercenaries did to Luca's mother while her son was forced to watch and her husband ran away like a coward. Suffice it to say that while Luca is an inhuman abomination in plate armor, I understand where he's coming from. The type of therapy that man needs has not yet been invented. The only thing keeping that man from continuing the war himself was the kingdom's loyalty to Luca's father, Agaris Blight, who simply wanted the fighting to end. But with the perceived atrocity of the Unicorn Brigade's demise whipping the kingdom into a frenzy, Agaris can do nothing but allow his army and his son to retaliate, and that is the foundation of the game's conflict. Pretty heavy stuff. Meanwhile, in Eiyuden Chronicle, the Eltiswise Watch, led by one Periel Groom, is working together with a military company from the Galdean Empire to find a primal rune lens, ostensibly by way of demonstrating cooperation in the aftermath of some military disputes. You're introduced to Noah and Sane.
I'm insane!
Two of the three main characters in 100 Heroes, as well as their respective entourages. They traverse a dungeon called the Rune Barrows, one of several, and retrieve the lens from its resting place. Months later, a big player from the Empire, General Dux Aldrich, starts pushing for more influence among his countrymen. It's not exactly clear how he got to where he is, or how he continued to get further, but he essentially does whatever he wants. Anyway, Noah goes back to his hometown and, along with Sane, witnesses an attack by a bunch of cloaked mercenaries.
My cakes will burn!
The town is burned to the ground, but no one is hurt. The town is rebuilt in a matter of days, and there were many witnesses who saw exactly what happened, including Sane, who, again, is a citizen of the Galdian Empire, a fairly well-known one at that. However, the town was technically in Galdian territory, and old Duck Hunt Aldrich spreads rumors that the attack was carried out by the Eldest Wise Watch, despite having worked together to get Galdia an insanely powerful artifact no less than 3 months prior. Despite witnesses who could easily give evidence to the contrary, despite the rumors indicating that Noah had allegedly burned down his own hometown. Everyone immediately buys into Aldrich's story, and Aldrich was allowed to send the entire Galdian army down to invade and conquer the city of Eltiswise, an act that nobody had a problem with.
I feel like just accepting that information right now, sure.
Then, while the Imperial Army was dicking around down in the League of Nations, Aldrich kills the Emperor off-screen and is just kind of allowed to take over in spite of the Emperor having an heir that we only hear about once or twice near the end of the game. We never see him, or even the Emperor, a single time throughout the game. Like Luca Blight, Dukes Aldrich has his reasons for doing what he's doing, but his motives end up being a story that was better told in X-Men 97 or the first season of Legend of Korra, human versus metahuman stuff. It makes sense, but logically it should take way more to get an entire empire to follow him without question. And if they were following him for half the reasons he was fighting for, it should have taken a lot more to get his forces to defect or surrender in the end. Seriously, Luca gets away with a few things that might seem unrealistic, but the reason becomes clear after about 2 minutes. The man is terrifying. Nobody is going to step to him. That is insane to even consider. Meanwhile, Dukes Aldrich gets away with what he does because the writers need the plot to happen. It feels like, just like they had their Ryu, their Joey, their Nanami, their Jean, their Vicky, their Hayo, complete with his entire storyline and girlfriend, they had to have a Luca Blight, regardless of how poorly executed he was. That's just a sampling of how shallow the game feels compared to the game they're ripping off.
Wait, there's more!
Suikoden has Flick, a young soldier who deeply admired Odessa, the leader of the Liberation Army, so loyal that he would have died for her. When she passed away early in the game and left Tyr McDowell, the game's protagonist, as successor to the army's leadership, Flick's reaction was not productive. He made many reckless decisions, causing a great deal of death and suffering to his own side. Only late in the game did he come to grips with his grief and invest his faith in Tyr, both for Odessa's memory and out of respect for what Tyr had accomplished on her behalf. Eiyuden had Ymir, the unpleasant quartermaster of the Eldest Wise Watch. He has nothing but negative things to say about Noah, his every last exchange delivered with vitriol and sarcasm. But when you lose Periel during the aforementioned attack on Eldest Wise, he lays into Noah with extreme prejudice. Is this where he finally opens up about where his vitriol comes from? Maybe he confesses some deep-seated emotions that have fueled his behaviors up to now?
No. No.
In fact, he goes back to normal pretty quickly after, and it's never mentioned again. He just goes back to acting like a prick. Maybe you get more out of him at the end of the game if he's the person you've spoken to the most, but I was not about to speak to him more than I had to. Most of the Eiyuden cast can be similarly unfavorably compared to the Suikoden cast. True, Suikoden could reuse its own plot and characters, but they were part of the franchise, and each installment allowed more of a character story to be told. Jean, for instance, went from being the eye-candy rune mistress in several games to being a major player in Suikoden 5. Vicky the Ditzy Teleporter had some insane Benjamin Button story going on that came to the fore in Suikoden 3, which featured not one, but 2 Vickies.
I'm seeing double here.
The difference being that Eiyuden, not counting Rising, is only one game that rips off almost all of their material from another specific franchise. I know they're working on DLC to expand Eiyuden into a franchise, but they're going to be building off a flimsy foundation of unoriginal ideas. I won't be surprised if anything new out of their development team is equally uninspired.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
Aside from Sane and Noah, Eiyuden has a third protagonist named Marissa. If you were to watch the trailer or even the opening cinematic from the game, you might be led to believe that these three characters have equally critical roles to play in the story. This is not accurate. Yes, Sane and Marissa are slightly more important than your average recruit, but all things considered, they are, in Suikoden terms, the Flick and Victor to Noah's Ryu/Tyr. They just get a little extra spotlight. Sane and Marissa are important, but not that important. They get their own little side quests at specific points in the game, and you're forced to split up 3 ways in one dungeon, with them as the leaders of their respective teams. But at the end of the day, it feels like they only added those vignettes to have something to point to and say, "Look at our 3 epic intertwined stories!" Sane's vignette featured his company infiltrating a castle close to his hometown. You might remember this part because it's the part that made me fall asleep. There you discover a bit more about Duke Aldrich's goals and about Sane's background. Sane's older brother died doing something, and it made some people sad. His family is of noble blood, but not that noble, because all it takes is Sane questioning Aldrich a little bit before he's disowned by his father. It's just another beat taken from Joey Atreides in Suikoden 2, who was also disowned by his noble-blooded family because they thought Joey was complicit in the death of the Unicorn Brigade. Compared to that, Sane's arc in general is lactose-intolerant milquetoast. That side mission infiltrating the castle could have just as easily been done by Noah with Sane in the party, and nothing would have been lost or gained. And don't tell me it's because Noah couldn't be seen walking around in enemy territory. In Suikoden, whenever the enemy took over an area, soldiers would always chase you out if you took a single step within city limits. Meanwhile, you can walk around in Eltiswise post-invasion or literally anywhere else without any issues at all.
Huh?
This brings me to Marissa. Of the 3, Marissa is the closest to being her own character, with little if anything borrowed from Suikoden games, except maybe a bit from a forest-dwelling community in 3. However, Marissa also has the least to do with the actual story of the game. Marissa belongs not to the Eltiswise Watch, nor to the Galdian Empire, but to the Guardians. The Guardians are apparently the custodians and defenders of the Rune Barrows. You know, those dungeons that we're constantly raiding for their artifacts.
Say, Noah, did you ever tell Marissa about our first co-expedition in the Barrows?
No, and maybe it's better we keep it that way.
At first she comes off like a smug punk, but she tones it down later on. Although she still prattles on about how important Guardians are when, honestly, they could be doing a better job considering how many rune barrels we ransacked without so much as a word from the Guardian contingent. Marissa's crew only really starts getting involved with the main story when some guy you've never even heard of invades her hometown in the last third of the game. In Suikoden, there is a vampire known as Necklord, or the Necklord. It's unclear whether it's a name or a title thanks to shoddy translation. In Suikoden 1, he's old pals with the Empire's evil court magician, who is the driving force of the conflict. He may not be on the Emperor's payroll, but defeating him contributes directly toward victory for the Liberation Army. Necklord returns in Suikoden 2 in a lesser role. Ousted from his previous position, he redirects his attention to one of the Joustin city-states, one that's more isolated from the rest, so as to regain his former power in secret. He may not be directly related to the Highland Kingdom, but defeating him earns the loyalty of the territory he threatened, and leaving him alone would have meant disaster for everyone. In Eiyuden Chronicle, one of the Duke's allies is a witch from an organization that is only vaguely hinted at. Her aims are unclear, her tactics are horribly inefficient, and her only real skills are speaking cryptically and bailing. You don't even get to kill her off, presumably so she can be the villain in a sequel, or more likely in DLC. One of her friends is a weird vampire man who randomly shows up along with a bunch of zombies, because this game needed a court magician Windy and a Necklord because Suikoden had those. Weird vampire man attacks Marissa's home. Just like when Noah's village was burned down and during the invasion of Eltiswise, this plays out without a single on-screen fatality because, much like the weird vampire man, the writers of Eiyuden seem deathly afraid of stakes.
Get off the drums.
drumsticks can also be chicken.
Now?
Eventually, Marissa takes the team to go fight him, a task Noah and company probably could have accomplished much earlier and in a fraction of the time. So, to sum it up, Marissa's biggest contribution was to defeat a guy who was vaguely related to a lady, who was vaguely related to the villain, for reasons that will probably be clarified in a game you have to buy separately. It deprived the Dukes of his zombie faction, yeah, but the faction only showed up late in the story, and this is more a strike against the Empire than Marissa? When your army has a zombie faction? How is the fact that the Dukes is not the good guy in question? Then again, our team isn't exactly innocent of that either, are they?
Are we the baddies?
Once again, it all reads as though this entire plotline was unnecessary and was shoehorned in to give Marissa something to do so the developers could tout her as being more important than she actually was. That and to cram in the aforementioned Suikoden material they hadn't ripped off yet. Oh, and Marissa has an annoying animal sidekick named Pooby who seems to enjoy constantly reminding us of his incongruent presence in his own Pokemon-inspired way.
Pooby? Pooby? Bee, poo! Pooby! Poo! Pooby,
You got a boo, boo, bee. Yeah, you got a woody and buzz.
I'm sorry, call me a killjoy if you haven't already, but this thing did not belong here. The only Pooby-related saving grace is that he was Marissa's companion and not Noah's, because if I'd have had to deal with that all game long, I would have shut it off long before Nerthus. I've been dropping not-so-subtle hints about it the entire time, but the first and foremost characteristic that sets Eiyuden Chronicle apart from the Suikoden games it claims to be echoing is its narrative tone, the emotions, the moments, the stakes, or in Eiuden's case, the complete lack thereof. The number of story beats it copies outright may make one believe they're playing a game of similar quality, but we'll see how it holds up to closer scrutiny. We'll begin with a brief comparison of how the game's respective leads became the commanders of their armies. Leadership of the Liberation Army is foisted upon Tyr McDowell because its former leader was killed while protecting children from Imperial raiders. Seeing his value as a son of an Imperial general, as well as his good heart, Odessa Silverberg entrusted him with the destiny of her people and the entire country before she died. The army remains a small faction, engaging in smaller skirmishes until accumulating enough victories and allies to compete with the Scarlet Moon Empire on even terms. Ryu's path to leadership of the Joustin army is a clever machination of its strategist Shu. Shu engineers a sneak attack on Highland General Solon G, where the entirety of the Joustin army, as well as Highland's conquered conscripts, can bear witness. Inspired by the brave actions of the adopted son of the legendary Joustin hero Genkaku, the conscripted troops defect, and the Joustin army quickly acknowledges Ryu as the face of its organization. Solon G's forces are routed and put to flight, after which G himself is beheaded by Luca Blight for allowing this to occur. You know, as long as we're on the topic of Shu, there's something I set up earlier that I totally forgot about. Shu was a shrewd, cunning man who believed soldiers were little more than pawns to be moved and sacrificed like pieces on a board. This mentality cost him his teacher, his lover, his career, and landed him in a backwater village working as an albeit successful merchant. Over the course of his story, he learns more about honor, bravery, and self-sacrifice to where, by the end, he puts his own life on the line to deal a massive blow to the Highland army. You can't help feeling kinda proud of the guy. Meanwhile, remember the Shi'arks? The big emotional payoff to their story arc comes near the end of the game, where the hero's army is cornered by the Empire, only to be suddenly rescued by the dumbass sailboat fleet of the Shi'arks, who have randomly and off-screen overcome their fear of water.
Howard, you've done it again.
Noah is promoted to the leader of the Eldest Wise Watch and later the League of Nations army, seemingly on a lark. He's a decent guy who likes to meddle, an odd flex, but okay. But he's young, he's inexperienced, nobody seems to respect him in any meaningful way, and when Periel puts him in charge of an army unit, it's because she's infatuated by the idea of a scrappy underdog overcoming the odds and beating back the Empire. It's like she's played Suikoden games herself and knows the beats. I wonder if that's supposed to have just been the joke? Nevertheless, this fails miserably when the Dukes returns immediately after their first failed skirmish, along with the entire Imperial army, and crushes the resistance utterly. Any sane person would consider this a military failure, and both Periel and Noah to be idealistic fools for thinking Eldest Wise ever stood a chance against such overwhelming odds. Aldrich takes over the city, and before Noah escapes with the rest of the Watch, he is asked by Periel to temporarily take her place commanding the army in the extremely unlikely event that she dies, invoking the trope that Odessa was subject to in Suikoden 1. She claims that he reminds her of someone she loved, her father specifically, but she would later go back on this, rendering the entire exchange pointless. So she put him in charge temporarily and for no reason of substance. As it turns out, she was correct about the unlikelihood of her death. Much like Noah's hometown burning, Eldest Wise being invaded, the zombie attack on Marissa's village, the invasion of Hishan, and the attack on Northstar, everything turns out fine. She not only survives, but is allowed to walk right out of the Dukes' presence with a smirk on her face to continue working against him. Never mind holding her for those trumped-up charges against the Watch or as a prisoner of war. If he does anything to her, she'll allegedly be a martyr for the League, so he just lets her go.
I just left.
This doesn't line up with the train of logic that's allowed Aldrich to get away with his actions up to this point, but why let that get in the way of the story the writers want to tell? So Periel ultimately returns to the army's base, but decides not to reclaim leadership of the army.
By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
They could have had Noah struggle to work his way back up after being seen as a failure in the first engagement, a subversion of Suikoden that gives us something new. They might have made Periel act as a double agent to get Aldrich to spare her only to betray him at a critical moment. But no, her character simply trundles along as the not leader until the very end.
Is that it?
No, there's more.
Aside from the military aspect of Suikoden and Eiyuden, there's also the arguably more important magical aspect. Behind all the armies and strategies and whatnot, another story is playing out, one that oftentimes is closely linked to the aforementioned wars. In Suikoden, the 27 true runes are just about the closest thing the Suikoden universe has to gods. They represent elements of the world, aspects of existence, and oftentimes serve as the driving force behind the conflict of any given game. One thing about this is that while the magical subplot usually provides the final boss of the game, it can often feel like incidental cleanup. By that point, you've won the military victory, and it's hard to see how one guy or even one big monster could change that. It's more about wrapping up the loose ends and confronting and eliminating the inciting elements at their core. In Suikoden 1, this is represented by the Soul Eater rune, the rune of life and death. It's the pursuit of this rune and its bearer, a boy named Ted, that puts Tyr McDowell in direct conflict with Lady Windy, the court magician of the Scarlet Moon Empire. It's thanks to this that Tyr loses his home, his status in the Empire, and by complete happenstance winds up joining the Liberation Army. Throughout the game, the pursuit of the Soul Eater, which gains its enormous power by feeding on the souls of those closest to its bearer, grows to a fever pitch until the final explosive showdown. Suikoden 2 features 3 true runes. The Highland Army possesses the Might of the Beast rune, which, while used sparingly, earns its name and reputation, voraciously consuming the bodies and souls of the wielder's enemies as it manifests giant monstrous wolves. No wonder Luca Blight basically builds his brand around this thing. Meanwhile, Ryu and Joey, in their efforts to defeat Luca and his followers and bring an end to the violent conflict, become the bearers of their own runes, the Bright Shield and the Black Sword, in accordance with their own worldviews. The nature of the runes themselves, however, would push the two childhood friends into a conflict of their own, and even with the defeat of the greater threat posed by Luca, a happy ending may not be possible. 3's conflict surrounds the idea of fighting back against the influence the true runes have on the world, and the inexorable march toward a frightening world order under their unknowable whims. 4 is... there's a story there... somewhere.
I couldn't care less.
5 features the Sun Rune and its penchant for turning kind, rational people into genocidal lunatics. Wait, Luna is moon.
That's no moon.
Either way, as the prince, you fight to free the land from the grip of the Sun Rune's curse against those who would use the rune itself for their own ends. Eiyuden Chronicle breaks tradition with Suikoden by not having runes. They have rune lenses.
Same kind of thing, different name.
Instead of true runes, they have primal rune lenses.
You know what?
Primal rune lenses.
All right. They're like
Rune lenses.
But they're
primal.
They aren't sentient like true runes that I noticed, and they don't seem to have individual aspects that are clearly defined. The story tells us that they're big and they're important. You find a bunch that are either fakes or inconsequential, and the 2 you encounter have no names to indicate what they do. The vampire man had one that let him summon crappy zombies, but that's all. The one we got in the beginning was just like, you can imbue its power into monsters. Douche Aldrich uses it to make himself physically stronger, I think. It's all kind of muddy, which leaves the narrative stakes kind of up in the air. TLDR, Eiyuden doesn't explain much of anything regarding its magical plot, even for the first game in a series. The primal rune lenses don't represent some big underlying godlike existential threat. They're just MacGuffins the plot likes to talk about like we should take them.
Super cereal! Nobody will listen to me but cereal!
They're plot devices. They're boring plot devices. And just another example of the pale imitation of an objectively superior story. Suikoden 1 and 2 were stories of war, death, of bigotry, and betrayal. Friends and family would find themselves on opposite sides of violent conflict, victims of a series of circumstances that had long since spiraled out of control. Eiyuden was a story of play fighting with false stakes, with characters that do what the plot needs them to do, for reasons that don't hold up beyond rudimentary, because that's what I have written here, explanations. If anything, I would say that Eiyuden is Suikoden Light, a Suikoden experience for those with delicate sensibilities who lack the maturity to handle the heavier content that the franchise often presents. Yes, Suikoden has humorous moments and characters, but it also has moments of tragedy and sacrifice. For every silly flying squirrel you recruit, there's a brave general who willingly marches out to die to give the hero a chance to survive. Eiyuden attempts the latter, but none of it feels genuine. None of it feels earned or earnest. Things happen just because the plot needs them to happen or because Suikoden had them and they have to jangle those keys to remind you why you bought the game. But we already know why we bought the game. We need stakes. We need investment.
You need emotional content.
We need reasons to keep playing the game other than because I don't want to have wasted $43. Eiyuden, as much as it wants to sell itself as Suikoden, is not Suikoden. Billing it as such feels condescending and disingenuous after having played it. Eiyuden Chronicle 100 Heroes is a functional game. It has a story, it has characters, it has combat and collectibles. It has all those very important things that a Suikoden successor ought to have. But is it a worthy successor to the name?
Why do you ask questions to which you already know the answers?
No. It doesn't build on what Suikoden was in its heyday. It does to Suikoden what Mystic Quest did to Final Fantasy, dumbing it down for an audience that either had no idea what Suikoden was, or is so desperate for more Suikoden-like things that they would applaud anything remotely resembling it. Eiyuden promised us a Suikoden experience, and what it delivered was a crowd-funded, shallow Suikoden parody. And for the sake of future games, we should expect better.
You've got to do better.
No! None of that! Shame on you!
Well, we have reached the end. My most sincere word of thanks to those of you who made it. There's a lot of other stuff I could get into or go back and clarify, but we're reaching feature film length here, and at this point it would just be more of the same, so I'll leave that to the comment section. There are many ways I could put a bow on this, but all things considered, there's only one way that makes sense. Hit it! I'm not super impressed by you, Dragon. The other one was, like, tougher than you.
I know where to strike.
I'm gonna have to figure out what the hell's going on with this out of stream, because it's just... this is not right. Okay, 2 hours ago, launched my game today from Steam, and it's running in developer mode. It says development build in the bottom right corner. Also, if you press F1, you'll see the debug menu where you can do all kinds of cheats. Hold on a minute. F1. Oh my god. This is wonderful. Okay, ally invincible, enemy invincible, all hit ally hit point fixed 1, infinite SP, infinite MP, battle speed, condition, result, item drop rate max. None of that matters.
Okay, I'm finally back.
Sam, you'll never guess what just happened.
Oh no.
Apparently, due to some bug, it's not just me. Everybody suddenly just like the developer mode suddenly just activated for everybody, and the debug mode is accessible. Unlimited power. But I need to abuse this while I can. Oh, it's not up to snuff yet? Let's see about that. Begum free trainer win count. Let's just, you know. Okay, there we go. And player Begum power up. And force win. Alright. I'll do that. Okay, and
I win!
oh my goodness! An extreme come from behind victory!
I did it! I won!
Meanwhile, I'm just here being pissed off at a game for not being able to spell kidding correctly.
What, that happened? Wait a second, what?
It's happening as we speak.
No kidding.
Ugh.